Okay, so how can we get people to agree to what we're trying to do with our project and our PID? How do we get them to buy in and take ownership of the PID and project scope? Well, one of the best ways to ensure that people have ownership and agree and are committed to the PID and project scope is, of course, to consult with them as we go through developing that PID. So one of the things that we want to be doing is through that PID process is consulting the key stakeholders, going back and forth, gaining their feedback and benefit from their experience as part of that process. So when we identify our key stakeholders, you might identify, for example, your project team, project sponsor, some of the key suppliers and consultants, for example, people who are going to be impacted by the project. As you're developing that scope, as you're developing the PID, you're going back and forth asking for their opinions, seeking their feedback, and weaving that information into the PID. So when the first draft of the PID comes out and you're circulating that around the key stakeholders, they already have ownership. They can see their voice permeate through the document, and it's going to feel like they're part of the process. Of course, PIDs are living, breathing documents. They don't, once you produce them, they don't remain static. You're constantly going back to them. Through your monitoring and controlling mechanisms, you're seeking feedback, you're reviewing, you're gathering data, you're analysing that data, and often making change. Even as the process I just talked about before, the consultation process, getting feedback, it's going to have an impact in terms of the document and the I suppose the number of versions that it's going to go through. So of course, change management is a really critical part of any part of project management, but it's also really critical when it comes to developing these initial documents, things like the PID and the scope. So understanding change management is really important. A good general approach for change management, preparing for change, managing change, and reinforcing change. If you've done a management qualification, you'll know that it gets quite more complex and nuanced than that. But generally speaking, there's three considerations when it comes to change management. We say, okay, well, we need to get ready for this change. We need to manage the change, and then we're ready to reinforce change. So some of the things that we would do through preparing for change is thinking about forces or incentives to move people from the old way to the new way. So if we're talking about, for example, changing the uniform, an incentive for wearing a new uniform may be a particular launch day. So if we have a particular launch day for a new uniform, we're going to have some fun activities around that. We're going to, as part of that process, give out some positive recognition. We're actually going to make it fun for people to go through the fitting process and so forth. That's going to stimulate, hopefully it's going to get people to stimulate to move to the new norm. If we consult, if we gain feedback on what the uniform should look like, if we have good representation through the process, that's going to stimulate incentive to people to go to the new change. We also need to minimise the forces that take people back to the old way. So sometimes that can be punitive. So some organisations, for example, may have fines or punitive measures for when things are done the incorrect way. So we have a new process. We've communicated that process, we've trained for that process, but there are people who continue to use the old process. There might be a performance management process that goes through to deal with that, and that's a punitive measure, so that's a bit of the stick approach. But it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, there are other ways that you can minimise incentives. So, for example, with the new uniform approach, one of the ways that you can minimise the forces for people to go back to their old way is to actually remove the old uniform. So as part of getting the new uniform, we'll take back the old uniform. And you might get a chocolate egg or something as a reward for that. So that's an incentive for people to bring back the old uniform. And what it actually does is it minimises the compelling force that might drag people back to the old way. If they've got no old uniform to wear, they can't wear it. And of course then reinforce managing the change, so going through the process of doing those things, dealing with people, dealing with queries, addressing concerns, giving people clear direction, all that's part of that managing the change. And then the reinforcing change is the providing the feedback, the rewarding positive behaviour, and correcting the negative behaviour. So all that's all part of that reinforcing change.